I very quickly became compromised in my teenage years. And that compromise didn't look completely terrible to the outside world because I was still going to church, I was still leading youth group, I was still leading people to Jesus. And yet, I wanted to try and have both. I wanted to have as much of Jesus as I could have and progressively as much of the world as I could have. And I found out very quickly it's just not possible. My name is Jacob Schwertfeger, and I've lived for the last 19 years as a missionary in Zambia, Africa. And for the last 17 years, I've been with an organization named Overland Missions, where I've served as the International Director of Operations for our global footprint in the nations. I grew up in a Christian home with amazing parents that love the things of God, that raised me up in the church, that taught me to love the Word, to love the things of the Spirit, to love the move of God. And so from a young age, I loved the things of God. I loved the ministry. I loved going to church and singing the songs and singing the hymns. And there came a point in my life as I accelerated in sports and just enjoyed playing soccer and football and basketball and baseball, and kind of had my hands in all of those different things that when I got to high school, I, as a freshman, was on the varsity team. And while that was a thing to be celebrated, at the same time, it really exposed me to an older friend group and a group of people that had more influence over my life than maybe others had. And I very quickly became compromised in my teenage years. And that compromise didn't look completely terrible to the outside world because I was still going to church, I was still leading youth group, I was still leading people to Jesus. And yet, I wanted to try and have both. I wanted to have as much of Jesus as I could have and progressively as much of the world as I could have. And I found out very quickly it's just not possible. You can't have both. And so my high school years, although I came out of such a strong foundation in the things of God, my high school years were marked with a lot of guilt, a lot of condemnation, frustration, heaviness, weightiness of performing well in sports and doing well in academics and being a popular kid and, being the class, I think I was a vice president and, all of those things. And at the same time, realizing in my heart of hearts, the very thing that I knew was most important, which was my commitment to God and following Jesus Christ, was the thing that I was compromised in. And it took a big toll on my life. It took a big toll on my joy. It stripped me of vision and excitement for my future, and landed me in a place by the time I was 17 years old where the world was celebrating my exploits and the things that I was doing well, but deep down inside, I could honestly say I hated who I was. I hated what I represented. And it was hard to look my dad and mom in the eye because they were aware there was compromise, but they didn't understand the levels of compromise. And deep down, if you really asked me, Jake, what's the most important thing in your life? I would have told you right off, it's the things of God. It's following the Word of God. It's knowing Jesus Christ, and to know that as your foundation and to pursue other things, every time lands you in a place of heart sickness and of hopelessness. And by the time I was 17 years old, I got to a place where I was really concerned about what my future was going to look like. And that was as I was the valedictorian and as I was the state soccer star and had, a lot of collegiate offers and everything. There looked to be a lot of hope and a lot of future, but all of that was dimmed by compromise. And so I had a radical encounter with the Lord that changed everything. 17 years old, came back from a weekend of partying and making a bunch of bad decisions, which I was accustomed to, and went back to my parents' home. They were not around at this particular time of day. And I went to my bedroom and dropped on my knees and felt very much like, the prodigal that had walked away from the Father and all the inheritance and all the promise. And because of sin, I didn't have a fresh revelation of God. I didn't have a revelation of His love, and I was terrified of His judgment. And I cried out to God on one of those prayers that kind of said, would you even take me back if I wanted to come back? Is there even a way for me to live radically for your plan and purpose? And as I began to cry out to the Lord, not with faith, with loads of doubt and pretty much certainty that God did not want me back, the presence of God began to fill the room. And at that time, it had been a while since I'd felt the presence of God, and I became terrified. I laid down on the ground and I shuddered and trembled in fear, thinking, well, God's shown up to kill me because I deserve hell. And as the presence of God grew thicker and thicker in the room, I began to weep and I lost words. I didn't have any more words for the Lord. And in that place, I became silent, and His presence grew and grew, and it was a weightiness in the room. And I was ready for rebuke. I was ready for the discipline that I deserved. And instead, the Lord spoke to me so clearly, and He said, Jake, I still love you. And when He spoke that to me, I'll never forget how immediately the peace of God flooded my soul. And it immediately confronted and drove away the fear, the doubt, the guilt, the condemnation. And I recognized right away, this is what I was longing for. And only God can satisfy the deepest parts of your soul. The longings that we carry can only be met by the Lord. And so in that place, and as all of this was happening in real time, moment to moment, I just said to the Lord, I'll lay everything down. If this is who you are, and if this is what your presence brings, I know I will be satisfied for the rest of my life, and I'll never want for anything again. And so I said to the Lord, I'll lay down every plan, every hope, every dream, every desire, and I'll serve you for the rest of my life if you still love me in the place that I'm in this dark, hopeless place. And I knew intuitively, it was like with that spoken word, I still love you, I understood He was not saying remain as you are. He was saying, I still love you, and this is not who you are. This does not represent who I've called you to be. This does not represent who you are under the definition of the Father. And that felt like an invitation to be who He had called me to be. It was an awakening in my life, and it changed everything. 17 years old, I went running down my stairs. I sat with my dad and mom, and I said, listen, I was getting ready to fly out that weekend for a pretty big collegiate visit. It was a school that I was most likely going to commit to. I called the coach up and said, I cannot come. I've got to really sit before the Lord and determine what the Lord has for me. And the culmination of all that was recognizing that not only was I going to lay everything before the Lord, but He was calling me to full-time ministry. And so, I remember going back to my high school and standing up in the cafeteria and announcing to everyone that, God has touched my life, and I need to ask for forgiveness for the way I've been living for these 4 years. It's been compromised. It hasn't represented Jesus at all, but I'm going to live for Jesus now. And people didn't know what to think of that moment and how to take it, but I knew that I didn't want to leave any security net. I didn't want any backups. I didn't want any backup plans. I was all in for Jesus. And that is what one radical moment in the presence of God can do to your life. And here I am, 40 years old, 23 years in the ministry. Lord's taken me to 50 or so nations of the world. And not only have I not regretted that decision, but I have more passion today for the things of God and for the presence of God and for the manifestation of His kingdom on the earth. After 23 years, more today than I did yesterday, than I did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because He's been faithful to His word. He's been faithful to His work in my life. He's been faithful to His promise. And His word is my word. And that's what happens when you open your heart to Jesus Christ.